Hey, welcome back, ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy, and Loki Season 2 kicked things off with a bang. So we pick up right where we left off in the Season 1 finale. So now we have to talk about why Loki was time-slipping, who pruned him at the end of the episode, why the TVA is stuck in an eternal loop, and how all this is laying the groundwork for Kang's ascendance to power in Avengers, Kang Dynasty, and Secret Wars. And before we get started, everybody, I just want to thank you for continuing to support our channel and for checking out our brand new merch store where me and the ScreenCrush team designed the shirts ourselves. For Loki, we are so excited to show you our usual variants t-shirt, Doug as Loki t-shirt and mug, and of course there's this variant hoodie with the variation of the ScreenCrush logo and this Miss Minutes dolly clock. Guys, shopping our merch store is the best way for you to directly support our channel. We deeply appreciate you watching, so let's talk about this ending. First, I want to talk about how time works in the TVA. Now, I think it's clear that the TVA exists within its own Ouroboros.
An who do what now?
An Ouroboros.
Oh, you're talking OB.
Yes, OB is named after this symbol, similar to how Mobius is named after a Mobius strip. Now, an Ouroboros, like a Mobius strip, has to deal with time. The Ouroboros is an ancient symbol that is commonly depicted as a serpent eating its own tail. This symbol is meant to represent an endless circle of events that happen again and again and again, similar to that of the sacred timeline we saw last season, a collection of timelines woven together into one continuous loop, all running parallel to one another and not varying off their predetermined path. Well, until this happened. So an Ouroboros is an eternal circle meant to embody the idea of a never-ending cycle, meaning that not only does the beginning lead to the end, but the end also causes that same beginning.
So like the same thing just happens over and over and over again?
Yes, exactly. Now, a little later, I want to talk about how Loki and Kang are both Ouroboroses in their own right, as well as Obi himself, who we know is named after the ancient symbol, and he was likely assigned that name by Kang the Conqueror. But first, let's talk about time slipping.
Hey. Oh my God, what happened to you?
Well, last night I went to a Halloween party with cocktails and candy.
Halloween parties already?
Yeah, please, just not so loud. I feel awful. I had too many jelly beans and drinks. So many drinks. I want to die.
Man, I am really sorry to hear that, but you know what? I never feel that bad after a big night out anymore because I started using ZBiotics. They're the sponsor of this video. ZBiotic is a pre-alcohol probiotic. That's actually the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. And guys, ZBiotics really works. I have a regular subscription that brings it to my house every single month. So here's how it works. Whenever you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in your gut. Now, it's this byproduct and not dehydration that's to blame for your rough next day. So ZBiotics produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. It is designed to work like your liver, but in your gut where you need it the most. So you take ZBiotics before you start drinking, and of course, drink responsibly and get a good night's sleep. Like, I am not kidding about this, guys. I love ZBiotics. I have an ongoing monthly subscription. Like a month ago, I went to a bourbon festival where I sampled a lot of drinks, and without ZBiotics, I would have been out after one day. Instead, I had a great time. You will not regret it. I highly recommend you give ZBiotics a try. Go to zbiotics.com/ScreenCrush or scan the QR code on screen right now to get 15% off your first order when you use the code ScreenCrush at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with a 100% money-back guarantee. So if you are unsatisfied for any reason, they will refund your money, no questions asked. So remember to head to zbiotics.com/ScreenCrush and use the code ScreenCrush at checkout for 15% off. Thanks again, ZBiotics, for sponsoring this video. Now, back to what I was saying. When Loki was pushed through a time door by Sylvie last season, he wound up back in the TVA. But as we now know, this is a past TVA, a TVA from before the events of the first season. That's why in the final moments of last season, Mobius and B-15 don't know who Loki is.
Who are you? What's your name?
So, time slipping means that Loki is being pulled through time and space involuntarily.
Yeah, but why is he time slipping?
Well, remember, Loki was sent into this past TVA by Sylvie using the temp pad of He Who Remains, a temp pad that he kept on his hand, very similar to this device that Tony Stark created in Avengers Endgame.
Fully functioning time-space GPS.
Now, He Who Remains likely encountered the EPR paradox that discusses the side effects of quantum entanglement.
Oh, back it up, back it up.
Beep, beep, beep. Sorry, okay, so quantum entanglement is the theory that particles can be connected on a quantum level even if they are far apart in both space and time. So, if He Who Remains was able to look out over the sacred timeline and exist in all of time and space, past and present and future, all at once, then this could have resulted in him time slipping as well and being ripped back and forth across time. So Loki went through a time door created by the He Who Remains temp pad, but Loki doesn't have the temp pad on his person, making it to where he can't control where he is stationed in time. and is instead being ripped across all of time and space simultaneously. This is also very similar to the wristbands that the Spider People have to wear in the Into the Spider-Verse films. As we've seen, when they're outside of their own reality, they glitch unless they have these stabilizers on their hands. So, if Loki had He Who Remains temp pad, aka his time and space GPS, I believe that would keep him stationed in the time of his choosing, just like the armbands that Miguel invented in the Spider-Verse films. Now, in order to save Loki from being torn apart throughout all of time and space, and to station him back in his chosen time, he will need to
violently rip myself from every thread of time and space.
Okay, so the plan OB puts together is for Mobius to use a temporal aura extractor that will extract Loki's temporal aura from the timeline. Essentially, Loki pruning himself will remove himself from all of time and space, thus ending the time slipping. But in order to survive the pruning and end back at his desired time, he will have to be extracted from the timeline. Okay, so the plan was for once Mobius was in position, Loki would prune himself, but he time slipped again and finds himself in the future without a pruning rod.
It's the future.
But as Loki walks down this hallway in the future TVA, we can see this figure lurking behind him, the same person who will prune Loki. Now, from what I can tell, it appears to be someone in a suit. So it could be Mobius, Ravonna, Victor Timely, or maybe even a character we've yet to meet. But my money is that it is Loki. After all, in the trailers for season 2, we do see Loki see himself in the TVA before time slipping away.
Between the past and the present.
Hello?
So, if this future Loki prunes his past self, our present Loki will be extracted from the temporal loom back into the past, or, his present. He'll then proceed to go down the same future path that eventually leads him to encountering his past self and pruning him to complete the circle.
So Loki eats his tail.
Exactly. Future Loki is meant to be the head, and the past Loki is meant to be the tail of their own Ouroboros serpent. So, in this scene, we are seeing the tail, our present Loki, get pruned or eaten by the head, the future Loki. This then spits the present Loki back into his present so that he can travel the circular path of the Ouroboros and consume his own tail, or in this case, to prune himself.
Sorry, what was that? I stopped listening.
Loki is in a loop, an Ouroboros all of his own, and that makes sense thematically because Loki's name comes from the Norwegian word for loop, which is lock. In mythology, the Loki character is meant to be an agent of chaos who always causes Ragnarok, the end of the world. But not only does Ragnarok end the world, but it gives birth to a new world. Loki's destiny has always been to cause the end and therefore to cause the beginning, completing the circle of existence over and over again, just like an Ouroboros.
Okay, so Loki is an Ouroboros, got it. But how is the TVA in an Ouroboros itself?
Well, we've been told that time works differently in the TVA.
Time passes differently here in the TVA.
When Loki reveals to Mobius that he was in the past TVA, Mobius says,
No, there is no past TVA.
but then we hear Loki explain that the time door he was sent through was summoned using the temp pad of He Who Remains.
It was He Who Remains his temp pad. So maybe that's how it was possible.
So this implies that He Who Remains temp pad has special access that no other temp pad has. Access to various moments in the TVA's past and future. So when Mobius says that the TVA has no past or future, he likely thinks this because 1, that's what he was always told, and 2, TVA issued temp pads do not have access to the TVA's specific strand of time, an Ouroboros-like strand of time that only He Who Remains has access to via his own temp pad. So if the TVA itself is in an Ouroboros loop, that means that it's also on a predetermined path, just like the other timeline strands within the sacred timeline. A predetermined path that is meant to occur the same way again and again and again, all in order to keep the sacred timeline moving. He Who Remains does not allow the TVA agents to travel through time on their own strand because then they could discover the many secrets he's hiding from them, such as where they came from and the former rulers of the TVA. We hear Loki mention that the TVA agents could have had their minds erased, to which Mobius says,
I have no memory of having my memory wiped.
so it's likely that when He Who Remains conquered the TVA, he wiped everyone's minds and created the facade of the Timekeepers to protect himself and his sacred timeline. The TVA is the key to keeping the sacred timeline in motion, and He Who Remains in charge. Think of it like a car. The sacred timeline has multiple timelines within it that are all running parallel in the same direction, and think of them like wheels, and the TVA is the steering wheel that keeps those wheels going in the right direction. So when the sacred timeline began to break into a vast multiverse at the end of last season, you can think of all that like all the tires in the car blowing out. Now, I don't know if you've ever blown out all 4 tires on a moving vehicle before, but it looks something like this. And that's essentially what we're seeing happen now with the TVA and the Time Loom. This multiversal engine is spinning out of control and is likely destined to crash and burn.
So you think the TVA is going to be destroyed because of all the splintering timelines?
Well, yes and no. Yes, because we're seeing the sheer bulk of branches overwhelm the temporal loom, which will eventually cause the entire thing to explode and destroy the TVA. But remember, this is an Ouroboros. The end leads to the beginning. I think the destruction of the TVA is all part of its destined path. The destruction of the TVA could be the very thing that created it, almost like rebooting a computer or the explosion of a universe causing the Big Bang that creates a new one. If the TVA's creation is caused by its own destruction, that implies that the TVA has always been, and that He Who Remains has taken advantage of this same flow of time happening again and again and again, and is using it to his benefit to remain in power. He Who Remains discovered a way for him to rise above and defeat his variants, and take over as the ruler of all of time and existence. Once he discovered this path, he understood that in order to maintain that control and guarantee that he remains in control himself, this same path has to occur over and over again, or he would risk losing that control. That means that in order to remain in power, he has to allow Sylvie to kill him, and he has to allow the TVA to be destroyed.
So how does this master plan work?
Okay, so in Quantumania, we met this variant of He Who Remains called Kang the Conqueror, a variant who was banished to the quantum realm by his other variants.
I will take my revenge on those who banished me.
Now, I actually think that this Kang from Quantumania is the same Kang who will become He Who Remains. The Quantumania Kang warned that the multiverse was dying.
I saw the multiverse and it was dying.
And his goal was to wipe his other variants from existence, take control of the multiverse, and save it from ultimate destruction.
That's what conquerors do.
We even see this Kang show Janet what a sacred timeline looks like. So I believe that the Kang we met in Quantumania is the same Kang who will become He Who Remains.
But didn't that Kang die?
Aw man, no way. He was sucked into his multiversal power core. This power core powered Kang's time chair, which allowed him to travel through the multiverse. And I believe that this power core is directly connected to the temporal loom. In this episode of Loki, we hear OB compare exposure to the temporal loom to what would happen if you fell into a black hole.
Have you heard about how if you fall into a black hole, you turn into spaghetti?
Now, turning into spaghetti is the same thing that we saw happen in Quantumania to one of Ant-Man's variants when he got close to the power core, meaning that the power core emits the same energy as the temporal loom. So, with Kang having entered the power core at the end of Quantumania, this could mean that he is lost in time, and he, like Loki, needs to be extracted. So, I think it's safe to assume that the TVA was once led by the Council of Kangs. We can even see their mural here when Loki is in the past. Or, this could be a mural of He Who Remains Kang before he created the facade of the Timekeepers.
But there's 5 of them.
Yes, but they could be meant to represent one Kang occupying all of time and space, past, present, and future, but you know what? More on all of them in a bit. But regardless, at some point in time, the Council was in control. The same Council who banished Kang to the quantum realm. In the Kang Dynasty, I believe that we'll see Kang return and defeat not only the Avengers, but the Council of Kangs as well. He'll then take his place as ruler of the TVA and ruler of the multiverse. And at some point, we'll get to hear this conversation take place.
For all time.
Always.
I will be proud to lead with you.
I think this conversation takes place after the destruction and rebuilding of the TVA, after Kang kills his other variants, and after the events of the Kang Dynasty. But the conversation takes place before Kang's ascendancy to the throne of He Who Remains and all the events that we see in the first season of Loki. In fact, we got a hint at this in season 1. When Loki arrives back in what we now know is a past TVA, we hear this conversation taking place between Mobius and B-15.
63 new branches in this unit alone?
Does he want us to just let them all branch?
This talk of 63 branches in one unit, and if he wants them to all branch, is in reference to the beginning of the multiversal war and Kang's takeover of the TVA after destroying his variants.
Person, I am so confused because I am so small.
Well, look, remember, buddy, we're in an Ouroboros. The same thing is destined to happen again and again. So I think that everything we're seeing happen right now has already happened many times before. The big war that we'll see in Avengers the Kang Dynasty will be the first time that we as the audience see this happen, but I think this war has happened an infinite number of times before, and that it's all part of the master plan for Kang the Conqueror to become He Who Remains, meaning that this particular variant of Kang / He Who Remains is in an Ouroboros of his own, an Ouroboros that requires him to die, but it always places him back at the top.
So in Loki season 1, we saw the end of the story.
Yes, He Who Remains' death is the end, and in an Ouroboros, the end is also
the beginning.
Exactly. In order to start the multiverse saga, we need to see its end.
So we already know how the story ends. Kang wins, becomes He Who Remains, lives for a long time time as ruler of the multiverse, and then eventually gets killed by Sylvie and starts the whole thing over again?
Yes, that's how it's always gone before, and we're going to get to see those events pan out in this season of Loki and in the Kang Dynasty. But this time, things are going to be different. I think that Loki's going to discover this master plan and realize that this is all going according to the plan of He Who Remains. So Loki, a conduit of chaos, will throw a wrench into this Ouroboros and bring the whole thing crashing down. And that is what will lead into Avengers Secret Wars. A secret war that will take place outside of time and reality and be responsible for the restoration of free will in this vast Marvel multiverse. A secret war that has never happened before and will bring an end to Kang's infinite rule. But that's just our theory. I want to thank the writer of this video, Colton Ogburn, the man who's trapped eternally in our television, but he doesn't know it, so please don't tell him. And guys, I want to hear from you. Let us know your thoughts down in the comments below or at either of us on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.